Well, here's kind of a YouTube shout back to someone who has watched my videos and found some inspiration to fix their own CD player. YouTube user Collins Up repaired his Denon DCD-920 CD player and sent me a video about it, which was very cool to watch. Well, here's where I tie this in. Kind of an interesting thing happened. I was garage sailing a couple of months ago, and I met up with the guy who used to work for our local newspaper taking photographs, and he was selling computer equipment at his garage sale. And I was on the lookout for a component-type CD player. Of course, garage sales in a small town, you usually don't find such a thing. Well, he told me he had one, and it turns out that what he has is a Denon DCD-920 CD player with a real 20-bit 8-time oversampling digital filter, which is really more bits worth of resolution than you need to decode a CD audio data stream, and a computed multifunction display, direct music select system, and a curious entry, remote controlled volume. Well, he said he knew this thing was in his basement someplace, and that he probably wouldn't want a whole lot of money for it because it hadn't been used in several years. Well, it turns out that recently he dug it up, and my mother got an email from him, and then I in turn got the email, and it basically boiled down to, it doesn't work, I'm going to set it on my porch, you have until Wednesday night to pick it up, and then it goes out with the trash. So I picked it up this morning. I cruised over there in the Buick, picked it up from his house, he left it on his porch, and it does indeed turn on. That's as far as I've tested it so far, but the display is nice and bright and clear, and while it does look like it's had some use, it certainly doesn't look like it's been abused, although there are some scratches and scuffing up here on the top cover. One of these little rings around these screws is also loose, so I don't know if someone's been playing around inside it or if it's just, been handled a little roughly. Let's go ahead and find a CD and put in here. Now, I don't recommend that you put a good CD that you care about in an unknown CD player, but this is what's handy. So let's see what happens here. We go ahead and close this thing. Whoops. Go ahead and close this thing up. The tray works like it ought to. Well, it works well enough to give us an index of what's on the disc. So let's see if it'll play. Well, it's having a little trouble with that. I could hear the laser sled clicking around in there. But it looks like it finally managed to do it. Looks like the time is advancing properly. I don't have an amplifier over here to plug this thing into. But it seems okay, so let's just try changing a track here. That doesn't seem to be too far out of whack. Well, these are the kind of repairs I like, when you can throw it in the back of a Buick and fix it. Let's go a little further out here. You can see there's kind of a cool graph over here that shows you, how many tracks you've played and how many there are on the CD. I think it goes up to like 25 or so tracks, so obviously if you have a CD that has more tracks on it than that, it won't show them all. But so far this thing actually seems to work. I'm a little bothered by the fact that it kind of took a while there to get things up and running at first, so I guess I'm going to pop the cover off of it and see what's going on, see if maybe there's something there that's kind of riding on the margin between good and bad, like maybe a bad belt or a gummed up laser sled or something like that. Of course, it should be said, well, the stop button doesn't work real well, kind of unreliable, but I can probably shoot some contact cleaner into that. Anyway, it should be said, as a safety precaution, although the laser in a CD player is a very low power and therefore pretty unlikely to be a hazard to your vision, it is a near-infrared laser, so your aversion, you can't see it. You can't see the brunt of it, although most will appear to have a dull red glow to them if viewed from an angle. You should never view one straight on. Anyway, your aversion reflexes won't work because the laser light energy is mostly concentrated in the infrared area. So if you work on your own CD player, be careful, because as the old grim joke goes, don't stare into the beam with your remaining eye. Now that is most definitely a vintage CD player. Wow, a lot of discrete components in here, a lot of stuff like that, even a little daughter card with what looks to be the actual audio decoding circuit on it. Front panel controller, probably a servo controller back here, a couple of adjustments for tracking and stuff that you really don't want to play with because you can royally ruin your day. A little bit of a power supply section there, probably takes the low voltage AC off the transformer and converts it to a couple of different DC voltages, but wow! And here's the explanation for the remote volume control. It actually does have such a thing. There's a volume knob on the front here, and it seems kind of stiff to turn it by hand, but there actually is a little motor here on the other side to drive it, which is pretty wild. It's a rare CD player that has its own volume control, and usually it only affects the earphone output, which appears to be true here as well. But I have never seen one that actually has a little driving motor on that headphone volume control. That's pretty wild. But now to see how it behaves when a CD is put into it. Now, generally speaking, this is pretty safe to do because when the CD goes into place, it should block all visibility of the laser. But like I said, be careful, don't take chances with your eyes because you've only got the one set. So let's just see what happens here. Oh, better plug it back in. It'll probably work better that way. Well, now it's definitely struggling a little bit. It started playing. Well, we'll have to see why it's making that clicking noise when it gets started, because to me that sounds like either a slightly smudged or dusty or grimy laser lens, or something that's not quite coming into place at the correct time, because as this drawer shuts, there's a relationship between this clamper and the rest of the tray. And if things don't come together at exactly the right time, the disc may grind or be scratched or scuffed. So if you've ever had a CD player destroy your valuable CD, that's the reason why. Now there I just stopped playback, but the spindle motor seems to be pretty healthy. Seems to start right up just like it ought to. So really, I think more than anything else, this thing could just use a little preventative maintenance and it'll be fine. You know, maybe it sat so long that it just kind of got stale and dried up and just needed a little bit of use and a ride around town, bumping around in the back seat of the car to get going again. It happens. Don't discount the possibility that sometimes a little bit of percussive maintenance, i.e. beating the daylights out of something but not so much that you break it, can fix all the problems that it has. Well, you can determine a lot of things by simply looking at how quickly a unit loads a disc and how quickly it finds the directory and how quickly it can start playing after that. The best test is to go ahead and actually play its audio into something and listen for any obvious defects. So here I have a little Radio Shack Realistic STA-19, 10 watt per channel I believe, stereo receiver. And now I just pop the music CD in there and turn the power on. Oops, still don't have it plugged in. Not very good at this yet, am I? That's better. This is Jimmy Buffett's Songs You Know by Heart. It came right up. I gave the laser lens a little cleaning, but I'm not sure it needed it. Although that stopped it making that clicking sound at startup, which would suggest that was being caused by the focus search as the lens moved up and down. Well, let's see how it'll change tracks. Let's go a few at first. No clicking, no skipping, static, or anything. So let's jump a lot of tracks. Works great. Behold, there is more here to the story than meets the eye, because in addition to the fixed line level output, I have a variable level output, a coaxial digital output, and an optical digital output, which I've only seen on newer CD players and very few consumer grade ones. So that's definitely kind of unique for a player from 1989. You look at that, there's the reason why the one screw doesn't come out. I noticed when I was inside here cleaning the laser lens that the little arm that supports it had snapped off, so I can only guess that at some point in time somebody was probably into this thing, maybe because it was being uncooperative. But a little bit of super glue ought to fix this right up. For what you see here, pretty much any modern CD player will have done away with nearly all of these discrete components and daughter cards and things like that in exchange for maybe one or two flat pack plastic ICs. So there's quite a bit of difference between a new CD player and an old one. But one thing that cannot be questioned, this is very clearly a high quality unit, because right there are the left and right digital to analog converters. Both of those are Burr Brown products, and they're 18-bit digital to analog converters. So 2 less than Denon promised on the front of the unit, but 2 more than you need for CD audio decoding anyway. So nobody should really complain too much about that. But one thing is pretty obvious. This must not have been a cheap player when it was new, because it does, well, it's got the optical and coaxial digital outputs, the variable rear output, which does work, although this knob is still much tighter than it ought to be, and I think that's because someone has actually pressed it in here. It has the ability, although very few audio CDs ever used it, an audio CD has a concept of both tracks and index marks. Now, most people are familiar with tracks because all CDs practically have more than one anyhow. But index marks are a little less obvious, but they're sort of a scheme where there'd be subtracks. And although any audio CD player will play a disc with index marks on it, most of them, especially most modern ones, are not aware of them. But this unit definitely is, and it would allow you to enter them. You can also enter tracks directly into it just by pressing a button here, and it'll start playing it immediately. Which is very cool. But these are the kind of repairs I like, although you have to be careful to make sure that once you've repaired something, it really means business, because sometimes devices can have little relapses. So just when you're thinking you're lucky enough that tossing it around for a ride in the car, taking it home and maybe letting it have some use has fixed it, you may get a surprise. So it's hard to be sure, but when you are sure that the unit has been fixed, it's a great feeling.